Hi everybody, Paul Gallagher. What I'd like to talk about today is a little problem this image posed for me when I'd come back from Scotland. This is taken at Loch Torridon up in the Scotland, Northern Highlands of Scotland, and it's when I got back with the image, it kind of first opened it up and it looked like this. And I was thinking the first two things I was most concerned about or wanted to check were okay with the highlights and shadows, because when I was there, the dynamic range was really quite wide. So I went up to the highlights and we can see that up the highlights here, we can see against the white background, although the part of the sky was really pale, the highlights are in. We can still see an edge against the white background. And when I came across to here, to the histogram, and clicked on the clipping warning, there was no red marks in the sky, which it dictates that there's been some clipping in the highlights. So I was quite happy with that. And then when I clicked on the shadows clipping warning, I clicked on that, and then we got this. Now, I often ask myself, oh, what could I have done better, either here or in the field? And really, it was quite limited because I'd had a graduated filter in the sky. So effectively, what we had is hard 0.2 graduated filter, or should have 0.6 two-stop graduated filter coming down to the edge of the lock there to hold in these highlights, and that clearly worked. But really, with the dynamic range being so wide, I've still been caught out. What this is in the foreground, incidentally, is a salt marsh. So these are freshwater rivers that run into the loch, but also when the tide comes in, it pushes salt water this way, and you get these kind of mud flats, these salt marshes, which create fantastic shapes. Now, what you have here is a very, very dark peat, almost black peat. And that's the thing that's caught us out here. Now, I mentioned a little problem. It's not exactly a huge issue what we have here. But one of the things in moving forward with this particular image would be using a certain control that I'd be reliant on, or partly reliant on with this image, and that'd be clarity. And clarity resides here. And what it does is it pushes out the tonality from the middle, so it pushes highlights one way and shadows the other way. It effectively separates out mid-tones. And in doing so, what it does is it pushes the shadowed areas there, and also pushes against the blacks, which would make this area, the blues, the clipped blacks, even worse. And I'll need that to create the three-dimensionality in the image that I want. The file that we're looking at now is pretty flat, it's a bit lifeless, and really the clarity will help us quite a bit with that. So for example, if I slide clarity across now, we can see that it's going to make things look a bit more three-dimensional, but our blues are going to expand and get worse, i.e. the clipped blacks. So how can we alter this? What can we do? Well, can we push the exposure across and try and drag all the tonality across? And you can see it's helping with the blue clipped blacks a little bit, but it's creating another problem. It's killing the sky off in the image. So that won't work. Let's double click that and get it back to where it was. How about shadows? If we push shadows across, will that work? Well, it's helping us a little bit, but rather than destroying the sky, it's making the entire image look even flatter. And that's the very thing I want to get away from. I want to make it look more three-dimensional. So shadows alone won't work. And what about if we just simply grabbed hold of the blacks and said, right, let's cut down the black channels, and we slid that to the right? It's not going to solve our problem at all. So it's quite stubborn. It's one little tiny bit of black in the image. But if we carried on using clarity and then controlled and then sent it to print, it would just lay down thick black ink. It would be no tonality in there at all. And if we did use the tools that I wanted to use and intend to use, then it would just get worse and worse and worse. And in the end, we'd have an image with solid blacks that would look ugly. So what else can we do? Can we come down to curve here? And if we start with the standard curve line here, okay, this is our parametric curve, and we look at, let's say, the darks. If we do that with the darks, once again, it's acting like the black slider in the basics tab. It's making the image look lifeless. So it's making it worse, moving it away from what I want the image to look like. I'll double click on that. How about shadows? If I push the shadows across, well, that's just hideous. It's making it look absolutely horrible, and we can't use that. And effectively what it's doing is it's kind of get the point on here, assuming where your shadows and highlights and darks are, and moving the tones around. But it's not going to help us. Where the problem is just here, at the very, very bottom left-hand corner. That's where our issue is. So how can we manage this? Well, we're on a parametric curve now. If we leave that behind, which is that one, and we come to this one next door, with it, which is a point curve, click on that. Okay. Now the one problem is the solid blacks. One little part of the image, and what we want to do is get rid of the solid blacks and then move forward without them coming back, without them being an issue. And where them solid blacks reside is here, this lower left-hand corner. Now we're on a point curve. This enables us to get hold of that solid black there and slide up the left-hand axis, and in doing so, it's getting rid of the solid blacks. Okay, but what it also does is it locks the black point. So when we're using other tools, now for instance clarity, that would have made that worse. What it's going to do is it's going to peg it and stop the blacks from going that far. So if we now go back to the basics tab, click on that now. Even if we now got hold of the black slider there and drag that to the left, increasing the blacks in the image, it's not going to clip the blacks at all. It's going to keep the blacks where they are. Okay. And if we see, look up here, we can see that there's a gap between the end of the histogram and the blacks. So basically we're saying we're going to stop the blacks there and they're not going to be completely blocked up or clipped. Now this enables us to not worry about the blacks, not worry about these all going solid in print. We're going to have some tiny parts where there's not much tonal transition, but we're going to have everything around it and all the other tones and colours in the image move around it without worrying about a clipped black. So now I can come to exposure and slide that across a little bit, raise the tones a little bit in the image, then bring the sky in with the highlights again. Then what I'll do is I'll raise shadows. Well, now I know this is going a bit flat, but now I can turn to clarity now. And when I apply clarity, I will not be clipping the blacks. I'll just be making them nice and rich and dark. And if we go into the image, we can see that when we're looking around these channels here and looking around these areas, there's still a tonal detail in there. There's still some tonal detail in here. So pegging the black point is really useful. We can all of us get caught out by really wide dynamic range. If it wasn't somewhere like this, it'd certainly be in a woodland we could get caught out. And this is just one of the mechanisms we can turn to and enables us to move forward, preparing our image and getting it ready for print. Thanks for listening, and I hope you find it handy.